Hello friends, in this video we are going to discuss the land system during British regime. Now before we get into the detailed discussion on the land system during the British period, to get a comparative picture we should know what was the land tenure system in India before the British came. Now we'll start with the ancient India. Now, if you go back to the ancient India, then we can say that the overall the kings owned all the lands, and kings or his intermediary claimed a part of the produce. So ownership was with the king, although the legal document did not exist that who owned the land. But then, in principle, the kings own all the land, and then the farmers produce the output. Now, a part of this output was given to the king, or his intermediaries basically collected, because the king protected the people from the external aggression uh, or from the other kings. So that's how the king claimed a part of the produce from the farmers. And then the revenue was collected from village individuals and deposited in a village common pool. And then some common expenditures of the village were paid out of this common pool. And however, the share of the overload was given by the village community as a representative of the village people. And then land is to be considered as the agreed wealth of the community, because the village people basically live together, and the land is to be considered the common property of the village, and that's how it used to be called the aggregate wealth of the community. And however, we cannot say that it was free from exploitation. Although the people live together in a village, the exploitation system or the differentiation mechanism still existed. And because we can see that the contribution to the village pool was different for the different people. It was not homogeneous in the village, because we see that the head man of the village enjoyed some revenue free allotment, and then the persons controlling the pool and the class favored by the dominant group paid lower rates of the revenue. So some people paid higher revenue, and some people paid lower revenue. So basically, the upper, or we can say the influential group, or the leaders in the village, they paid actually less, or they enjoyed the revenue-free allotments. But the working class basically paid the revenue, or they contributed higher percentage of revenue to the common pool. That was the ancient India. Now coming to the medieval India, where basically we see the Mughals were ruling the country, ruling India. We can say the undivided India, that is India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and all these regions, South Asia. Uh, when Mughals were ruling, we see the evolution of the intermediaries, and basically Muslim rulers engaged the military personnel for collecting the revenue from the cultivators, and they basically the Mughals paid these intermediaries with a plot of land for their services. So some intermediaries were paid some amount of land, and they were in charge of collecting the revenue from the cultivators on behalf of the king. And gradually, the allodial, or we can say the independent of the landlord tenure, became the feudal terms, and that became basically hereditary. And because these intermediaries gradually became basically they inherited that was transferred to the next generation, and that's how the independent landlord system became a tenurial feudal term. And then this during this Mughal period, we see the Zamidari system again came into place, and the term Zamidar became a predominant term in the 17th century. And Zamidar in Persian language means keeper or holder of land, and the suffix dar implies a degree of control or attachment, but not necessarily ownership. So Jamin means land, Dar means a degree of control. So the person who controlled the land is to be called Zamidar in Parsi language. That's also we see that Zamidari terminology is coming to India during the Mughal period because and that's how the Parsi meaning and the word is introduced in this country. And then the ownership right originated during the Mughal period when the term implied hereditary claim to a direct share in the produce of land under his possession. So the whoever actually owned the whoever ruled this country, they inherited the land, and then they appointed the zamindars who were basically the control of land, and that also became hereditary. And they collected basically the revenue on behalf of the rulers or the Mughals. So the Zamindar system is coming into place during this medieval or the Mughal regime or in the 17th century to India. Now, then the British come to India, and then we see that in different phases, they started ruling different parts of the country. That's what this is shown in this map, and how different parts have been ruled by British in different phases. And we see that the dark, the deep dark actually color shows the British started ruling before the 1766, 1767, then faded dark 767 to 791, and then again further faded 792 to 1805, and then purely white 1806 to 1819. And that's how the acquisition of British India and Ceylon happens in different phases. And this map shows this. And the Indian states under the British protection, we saw that the cross lines actually are from or before 1806, and then the dotted areas show between 1806 to 1819, and again we see different rulers. The left left to right sloped lines show Hindu and Sikh rulers ruled states, and then from right to left sloped lines actually show the Muslim ruled states. And we also see that how the presidency term comes up. During the British period, there are three presidencies: Bengal presidency, and then Madras presidency, and Bombay presidencies. So that will be useful to understand, like in how different presidencies, different land tenurial system existed in India. Now, definitely the land tenurial system was not uniform in India, in different parts of the country. So we'll discuss how the tenurial system was different in different parts of India. Then coming to the northern part, northern and central India, we see the Zamindari system was there, and then we had two terminologies, two type of Zamindari. One is primary Zamindar and then secondary Zamindars. The primary Zamindars were basically the landholders who had the immediate proprietary dominion over the soil, and that included a restricted power of mortgage and alienation, as well as the right to allocate cultivators, control the waste, sink oils, and plant growth. So, other than revenue collection, they had many other responsibilities, and they are also known as the village zamindars or patidars or biswadars or maliks, and they settled as dominant lineages in a number of contiguous villages, which were often grouped into lineage tapas or parganas, and which ranged in number from 2 to 3 villages up to 84 or 84 parganas. You know that in West Bengal now also there is a district called 26 Pargana, and that is the primary zamindar. They were collecting revenue as well as they had the other powers to basically to locate the cultivators, and they could also alienate the land from somebody, and they could decide actually the planting the groves control the waste or the sink wells and so on. But on the other hand, the secondary zamindars had the rights only to collect the revenue. So they had limited power, you can see, compared to the primary zamindars that existed in the northern and central India. And then coming to the land revenue collection formula, we see that in the past, it is said laws of Manu. Manu actually had given the principle that 1/6 of the gross produce will be collected as the revenue. And however, this can be raised from 1/4 actually to 1/4. Usually, in the normal time, the farmers, the cultivators will have to pay 1/6 of the total produce as the revenue to the king. And however, if there is a war or in some other emergency, the king can collect a little higher revenue, that will be 1/4. Okay, and that means 24th of output will go to the king as the revenue. And then, or we can say the royalty, actually, that king actually got this, the part of the royal actually. And then during the Mughal emperors, this amount was increased further actually to 1/3, from 1/6 to 1/3 actually when Mughal emperors come. So basically the amount actually increases. And then Akbar also introduced cash payment, and it was again 1/3. So the royalty was just quite high actually, 1/3 you have to contribute to the revenue as the revenue to the king. And the rates were fixed by calculating the price. Akbar basically introduced the cash payment instead of paying in kind. In fact, when in the past, basically, the somebody will come to the harvesting place, and then we will see actually uh, the total produce, and then 1/6 of the total produce will be taken away as the revenue. And later on, it increased to 1/3. And but however, Akbar introduced cash payment. You do not have to pay in kind; you can pay cash, and the rate was fixed by calculating the price of the grain on an average of the previous 19 years of the reign of the king. So that's how the price, the revenue, basically land revenue, was fixed in cash term. And then looking at the type of properties actually that existed, or the properties owned by the different agencies, were property of former government and estates, that is reversion of the property to the state. Either the government owns the property, has come back again to the government. And then land sold for areas of revenue and bought in. Basically, if somebody could not pay the areas, that land will come back again to the government of the king. And then lands not under zamindars and exempted from the regulation. And then waste land property of the government, and then land acquired for the public purpose. So during British period, the different types of land as well that existed were as well this, that we had property of the government, of the former government, or the land has come back to the government. And then land sold for the areas of the revenue, and then lands not under the zamindars and exempted from regulation, and then wasteland, and then lands acquired for public purposes. Then how actually the landlord rights actually were given to different people. Basically, landlord rights were derived actually from a position as a revenue farmer or a land official under native rule. Basically, most of the government officials who worked under the British regime got this landlordship from the British government. And from a territorial chiefship or rulership, or from a state grant of some kind. Either your predecessor or your family member or father was serving in the British administration. So that's how he was a chief territorial officer or the ruler. So you inherit that, or you get basically a state grant of some kind. That's how you inherit the landlord rights of over the land. Now, in Bengal, West Bengal, we can say the Bengal presidency, they can we had a different Zamindari system, and in fact, how Zamindari system actually, how the British actually announced actually somebody as Zamindar. It was basically acknowledged as landlord by the permanent settlement. We know that no permanent settlement was implemented by or under Lord Cornwallis regime in 1793, and that's how under this permanent settlement, somebody will be announced as the Zamindar, and Zamindars originally. Zamindars were originally the not actually really landowners, but the revenue agents. They were collecting revenue on behalf of the British government from the cultivators. So they were not originally the landowners, and basically they were subject to the official appointment by the warrant, and no power of alienation was given. That means British government appoints an agent, but this agent cannot alienate somebody actually from this land. The British only allocates, but they appoint the agent to collect the revenue. That's how initially Zamindari, we can say that it was only the secondary Zamindari system that existed in the Bengal presidency, and then the position gradually becomes hereditary and turned into landlordship. Okay, so it becomes hereditary gradually, and then the zamindars were entitled to cultivate a large area of wasteland and became owner of them. We have discussed that we have different forms of land, different types of land, and zamindars were also entitled to cultivate a large area of wasteland because they were serving the British. So they can do this. And there are also ample opportunities of buying up land and getting it in mortgage or seizing it for the unpaid areas of the land. Because since they are collecting the areas, with that money they could buy some land, and then they could mortgage also the land, and then they are also seizing the land if some farmer could not pay the areas of the rent. So that's how Jamindars started acquiring a lot of land, wasteland that they had got from the official. And each Jamindar was also given certain land exempt from revenue as Naukar, okay, or Naukar basically as the servant of the British. So that's how the Jamindars actually gradually become powerful, and that becomes hereditary in Bengal presidency. And then we see that the British administration initially give this Jamindari system on a lease basis, and for 5 years lease of the revenue district or part of the district to some Naukar, or we can say some officer, for just collecting the revenue. And many of these existing Jamindars were set aside. How the basically whoever were there in the past, they were set aside. However, again, soon Zamidari system was restored. So, not actually the land leasing system actually existed. There are later on this land leasing system actually was abolished, and then this permanent settlement act was already in force, and that's how Zamidari system was restored. And then this Zamindari system term actually also increased to 10 years. That means the British will give the responsibility of collecting revenue to some intermediary, the Zamindars, for 10 years, and they will be collecting revenue from people. And of course, we discussed that that became also hereditary over time. And there are also separation of the taluks, and government not only extended these privileges of landlord title and permanent assessment to the district farmers or the local chiefs and heads of the district who had held something of the same position as regard of the revenue of the district, but also the British administration gave smaller landholders in the districts, and they were basically called as taluks. Basically, the smaller estates were called as taluks, and so when there was bigger areas were given, the district farmers were bigger farms, 20,000 acres or more, and then there are also smaller estates were given to people, the talukdars. But the farm was separate, same actually, although the land size was different under different administration. And so that was the permanent settlement in the Bengal presidency. Then permanent settlement also existed in Banaras region, and however it was a little bit different from the Bengal presidency. It basically in the Banaras region, we see that the landlord basically it consisted the landlord villages actually with a rather stronger class or the tribal connection, and the chiefs and heads of section had also obtained the lordship. Basically, the village heads and village chiefs had obtained the landlordship. It's not necessarily that the officers who served in the British administration got, rather the local influential people got this landlordship. And this was separated from the Banaras region was separated from the Bengal, and this belonged to the northwestern provinces. And we know that the presidency term was used only for three regions. One is Madras presidency, then Bengal presidency, and Bombay presidency. But other regions were called as provinces. So that's how the Banaras region was separated from the Bengal presidency, and it belonged to the northwest provinces. And the settlements are made with the head of the families and the local magnates, not necessarily the officials of the bureaucrats in the British administration. And then wastelands were liable to a permanent assessment under the name of Taufir. So for wasteland also there was a permanent assessment that was called as Taufir. And then in the Oudh region, again, there was a different land tenurial system, and that's what we are going to discuss. The case of Oudh and the northern end was quite different, and the talukdars of Oudh were owners of large estates and had complete control over the resources of these areas. And the British policy was to curb the strength of the talukdars. And from 1764 to 1801, the British government gradually tightened the noose on oath. They basically the British actually tried to do some politics actually, and that's how they installed the British troop in Oudh region under the pretext of helping the Nawab to keep the Talukdars under control. And the payment for these troops was made by handing over half of Oudh to British in 1801 and other half in 1856. So basically, the British people play politics, and then they try to take the land from the Nawabs, okay, for basically protecting the Nawabs from these from basically for providing this help actually, and that's how the land is transferring from the Nawabs of the Oudh to the British administration. And that's how they also started acquiring the adjacent provinces. And the British, however, extended the contract of the talukdars by a period of 5 years, after which the lease was terminated. Okay, so the British people took the land from the Nawab. They took the control of the land from the Nawab, and initially they extended the contract of the existing talukdars by the next 5 years, and then that was terminated later. And then we see the village settlement actually was introduced, or you can say the Mahal settlement was introduced in Oudh region. And the temporary settlement developed in the northwest provinces, and the body of the co-sharer, or a group of the farmers, basically the village was given the power actually to do the collection and to do the cultivation and collect the revenue and make the payment. So the co-sharer was regarded as the landlord and responsible for one assessed sum of revenue. So they paid the fixed amount of revenue to the British. And same system was also applied to the Ajmer, Punjab, and the central provinces. And then we see that in the Madras presidency, the Zamidari system was the land tenure system was different compared to the other presidencies. And initially, the attempt was made actually basically to introduce the permanent settlement like the West Bengal, then like in the Bengal presidency, in the Madras presidency, because for many years actually no form of regular settlement existed in the Madras presidency region, and later basically they determined to apply the permanent settlement of the Bengal mode to the whole Madras presidency. And however, there are lands both under the permanent settlement as well as the Raiyatwari. And we see that in gradually actually that in the Madras presidency, the permanent settlement was not successful, and Zamidari system was not successful, and we saw that Raiyatwari system was introduced in Madras presidency. So there is a beginning of the Raiyatwari system in Madras presidency, and how the Raiyatwari system is different from the Zamidari system. It was basically that you fix a rate on the land rather than arranging a payment for the individual called Raitwari settlement. Okay, so you fix the rate for the land, okay, and not actually for the intermediary. Okay, and initially it was implemented in the Salem or Baramahal or the 12 states region, and later it was expanded to the other areas between 1792 to 1801. And there is also Madras village settlement in some districts, chiefly in Tanjore and in country adjoining Chingalput. That was the Madras village settlement was introduced. So in Raitwari, basically there are individuals who will pay a fixed rate to the British directly, and basically there is no middleman in this Raitwari system. And then in some region also the villages in a group also could pay the revenue to the British administration, and also the village lease system was suspended by Raitwari latter. So Raitwari system was introduced. That means from individual to the British direct, because the British directly collect, decide the rate, and that's why we pay them directly. And so the right-of-way system basically deals with the actual occupant of each field, and there is no need to do more than value and assess the fields correctly. There is not need to do more than the value and assess the field correctly. So you just decide the rate at which the revenue will be paid or the rent will be paid. You don't have to do anything else. And the actual occupant is practically the owner, although the land document actually did not exist. So British had to only prepare a taram list, okay, and that basically included the general revenue rates for different category of soil called the taram. Okay, so for different category of soil will have different revenue rates. And in Raitwari system, there is no joint responsibility under which the cultivators in a village may be held accountable, and then each Rayat is free to relinquish his holding or any separately demarcated and registered part of it on giving notice in due time according to the rule. And so that means there is a flexibility in this. If you are not able to pay the revenue, you can give this up, give up this land to somebody else, and depending upon the rate that has been fixed by the British government, you just pay the royalty, pay the revenue to the British government. And then the duration of the settlement was a little longer compared to the British administration, where the term was for 10 years. In the Madras presidency, it was Raitwar system term was for 30 years. And then in the Bombay presidency also, we see there was a Raitwari system. And so the second Raitwari system of India was introduced in Bombay. So unlike Madras, Bombay basically had a complete revenue code, and so this revenue code included all powers for survey, assessment, and other matters connected with settlement, and they could increase the revenue rates in between, where they basically kept the provision that whenever they want to increase the revenue, they can increase to 30 percentage on the whole taluka, or 60 percentage on the village total, or 100% on the single holding above the last assessment. So quite high, no, the royalty, no, the revenue rates no, could be increased 30% over the entire Taluga region, or 60% in the village, or 100% over the particular land holding. So it was quite a high actually rate. And the period of settlement was 30 years. However, in the Sindh region, the Raiyatwari system, the period of settlement was little shorter than this 30 years. And now, if you see the implication of such a land renewal system during the British period, we actually see that okay, in 1769, the East Indian Company divided all the parganas into 15 lots each, and auctioned them with revenue to be paid to the company. Basically, to get the maximum revenue, they initially auctioned in different regions, and 15 lots were divided. And before this, we saw that this royalty or the land revenue used to be negotiated and adjusted to the ability of to the pay. Basically, local people used to basically negotiate with the kings that how much revenue they can pay. But the British basically emphasized on the legality and the consistency of the payment. That's how it resulted in the disposition of the farmers who could not pay a fixed amount of the revenue. So either you pay or give up the land. So many farmers actually had to basically surrender the land, so they're landless. And then, since the British people introduced the auction system, we see that the auction sells place the ownership of the land beyond the reach of the poor person. So it's only the people who could pay a very high rate in this auction process, they could only get this land ownership for the Zamidari system, we can say. And that's how it created a new aristocracy system in the country. Basically, they were the money lenders and traders. They also started holding the land. The powerful people started holding the lands, and so the new owners squeezed the peasants to pay the speculative land revenue. So British people basically tried to introduce the the formality, basically the legalized way of owning the land. They try to basically give the property right over the land. They wanted to legalize the land ownership system, but we see that the land actually is now controlled by a few rich people, and although they are not the cultivators. And so cultivators are different, and then zamindars owned the land, and they were basically exploiting the farmers. And then the government expected that the British government thought that by increasing the term of the lease, they could incentivize the farmers of the zamindars to do investment and make the landlords innovative. Because in the theory of property right, we believe that if you give a secured tenure, then people would do investment, and if they get a lease for a long term, then the landlords would make investment to develop the land. And however, the extension period of the tenure did not really, help or increase the productivity of the land. No investment happened, and then however, the land revenue increased 4 times compared to the level before the assessment. And zamindars were heavily taxed, and that they kept themselves busy in shifting the burden to the riots. And that's how the dispossession of zamindars also happened due to non-payment. And and then we also see that the appointment of active revenue farmers, or the jagirdars and collectors, disturb the client and patron relationship of the landlord and the tenant. And that used to actually serve as the insurance against the natural calamities. So since now there is an intermediary between the British and the farmers, then they could not actually do the bargaining. Actually, if there is a natural calamity, you will not be in a position to pay the revenue. But the appointment of the active revenue farmers, or the jagirdars, or the collectors, of revenue basically disturbed this relationship between the landlord and the tenants that existed during the king time in the ancient and medieval time period. And so that led to the confiscation of estates by the British government for non-payment of revenue, and that's how this disrupted the entire rural sector. And the labor force was basically disturbed, and that was it created a labor shortage in the rural area also. And by the middle of the 19th century, the whole agrarian sector was in a decaying condition. And then the rural habitants dependent on agriculture were also immigrating, and because productivity of agricultural land is actually deteriorating, and the farmers are feeling harassed actually, because if there is natural calamity, you have to also pay the same revenue. So then farmers are not interested actually to do cultivation, and that's how they started immigrating. And the villages deteriorated, and their revenue also started declining. So that was actually basically the land situation during the British period. And if you see the system of land revenue in a single map, what was the land tenure system in the entire India, this map actually presents the scenario that how in different parts of India we had different settlements. We see that the crossed lines actually show the permanent Zamidari settlement that actually was there in the Bengal presidency, and in some part of the Madras, yeah, mostly it's really in the Bengal presidency. And then in the left to right sloped lines, as we saw the Raiyatwari system that existed in some part of the Madras presidency and Bombay presidency. We also see some part of the northern provinces, also northwest provinces, also that was there. And then the temporary settlement, see the dotted part basically in the central provinces of India, and some part of the Banaras and the northern provinces, we Punjab and all those regions, we see that the temporary settlement existed. Basically, Mahalwar and Maljir and related farms, Zamidar and different farms. And so in different parts actually we see different forms of settlement. The permanent Zamindar settlement in the Bengal presidency, Raiyatwari system in Bombay presidency and Madras presidency. And then we also see the government estates, the black, dark land areas, and then dotted dots, so dotted areas. So the temporary settlement regions in the northern provinces and in the central provinces majorly. And if you see the revenue collection amount, how much land revenue is to be collected, then we have seen the different boxes, and the rates are also written. Somewhere it is given in thousand of rupees in 1872. So you see in the Bengal presidency 4,190, then in Madras presidency 3,800, and then in Bombay presidency 2,150. Then northwest provinces 3,920, and in Punjab region 1,840. So like that, in different parts also we see that different settlements were there, like Zamidari, Raiyatwari, and temporary settlements. The rates were also different. So we cannot say that in the entire country we had a single form of tenure system during this period. And then we see also the white patches, that those are basically still controlled by the kings, and then that was basically not coming under the control of the British regime. So that's all. These are the references that I have used for preparing this lecture. All of you can go through this if you want to know more about the land tribunal system in India. These are the references. Thank you very much. Thank you for watching this video. If you like this video, you may subscribe my channel to get further updates. You may share this video with your friends. Thank you very much for watching this video.